One concern pilots have always had about drone racing is breaking their frame. A broken frame usually means that you need to move on to a second quad, or you need to just go home, pack up your stuff, and your racing for the day is done. However, the quadcopter companies started trying to compensate for weaker frames by doing things like, beyond the two normal spacers like I have here, they also put in these carbon fiber pieces that provide a dual purpose. First one is to help hold the camera in place, and the second one is also offer some more support for this top plate. And what that does for the top plate is it makes it so that this top plate doesn't have to get any thicker. It can stay the same thickness that it's always been. Another thing they started doing was making these main plates 4 millimeters thick. Back in the day, it wasn't uncommon to see some that were 3 and 2 millimeters thick. Now 3 millimeters kind of become the standard for racing quads, and 4 is kind of the people who don't want to break quads nearly as much as they do want to race. But now the problem with doing all this is that all this extra strength comes at a cost, and that cost is weight. And so if you look at some of the more recent quads that are being made, like the Floss and some other ones, they're building them with a very light frame, and they're trying to get rid of as much material as they can in order to lose that weight, and instead make it so that the pieces are easier to replace. Today I have a BFight210 that I'm going to be looking at. It comes in a package like this. Very, very fancy. And this is what it looks like when it's assembled. And this came from Banggood. It's called the BFight210, and this frame is supposed to, it says that in the description that it weighs 59 grams, but I don't think it's quite that light. We'll find out. So here are all the pieces laid out, and you can tell right away there aren't very many. There's the screws to hold the arms onto the main plates, and the screws to hold the top plate down to the frame, and the little spacers and the carbon fiber camera mounts. Now these arms are super skinny, and if I go ahead and measure these here, you can see they're only about 10 millimeters wide and 4 millimeters thick. So 4 millimeters is like what most of the high strength quadcopters have been using, 4 millimeters. So these guys decided that they're going to try to make this skinnier to make it lighter and to get rid of as much of that weight as they can. Now one thing you'll see here is that it's kind of thin around up here where the motors attach onto the arms. Now I've never broken a frame up here by these mounts up here. I've always broken it somewhere in the middle, and it usually comes from the quad hitting something real hard and then the layers actually separating inside there. Now I've only done that on one 4 millimeter main plate, but in this case these arms are going to be skinny enough that it can become a real possibility. So why would you want to build this? Well, because these arms are super light, and like I said, the whole frame is going to be pretty light once it's assembled. When you're building these ultralight quadcopters, one thing you want to make sure of is that extra parts are available, especially the arms, because you're going to break these arms. Although this one is very stiff. That's good. But you're going to break arms, so you want to make sure that you have extra parts available. Now in the case of this BFight210, there actually aren't any extra arms available yet. So what do you do in that case? You buy another frame, and that way you have 2 of them, and you got extra arms right off the bat for your new frame. So on this one here, I'm going to go ahead and get this on a scale, and we'll see what it weighs. Now just for comparison, a Hyperlight weighs about 60 grams. And we'll put this on here, see what it comes out to be. About 63, I think they're about 63.5 grams. So that's a very light frame. Most racing frames that you find are going to weigh up near 100. Now of course they're going to have the wider arms, going to have a bigger, heavier top bottom plate, and maybe some more pieces inside to help hold everything a little bit tighter and make it a little bit more durable. But these ultralights, they're not trying to get light, or they're not trying to be heavy and strong, they're trying to be light. That way you can win more races on the race course by finishing faster. And the only time it really becomes a problem is when you crash. So the easy answer is, of course, you know, don't crash. Now let's see how much space there is in between these plates here. There's about 25 millimeters of space between the plates. Now one thing you got to remember when you're putting this together, the bigger plate goes on the bottom and the smaller one goes in the inside, and that allows these spacers to actually fit inside here. So the spacers up here in the front are actually a little bit taller than 25 because they're not going to the bottom piece there. They're going to be about, what's that, 30 millimeters or so. Now I don't know why they do this, but on this one, if you take a little close look, you can see, look at this thing. It flops around in there. You can see a little piece moving up above. It just flops around. The bad thing about that is this is just going to introduce vibrations right into your camera, and you're going to see all these stupid vibrations, all because this thing is too loose. So the one thing that I would immediately recommend is that you get rid of these spacers and get a 3D printed piece that goes around the spacer and then around this one too, and then connects to your camera. Now in this case it's going to be a little bit wider than some of the other spacers that you're going to find, so you might have to do some adjusting on the pieces that you make, print them out of TPU so they can flex. The other problem you're going to have is that these are awful close to the spacers for the flight board. So you don't really have a lot of space inside there. It's kind of a bummer because you need a little bit of extra space to put those spacers around there, because these are kind of floppy. But that kind of stinks. But it's still, overall, it's a pretty cool frame just because of the lightness that it has. And this is the first one I've seen on Banggood that actually weighs less than 65 grams. On these ultralight frames, you don't just want to throw any motor out on the arms and expect that it's going to do well. On these XS220 frame like this, where the arms are nice and wide and nice and thick, yes, you can put about any motor on here and it'll work okay. It may be some better than others, but any motor will be fine. In fact, this is a 2306 Emax motor, and it doesn't look very big on this frame here just because these arms are heavy and wide. Okay, we take a 2306 and put it on this one here, and it looks ginormous. And it really is. Now, on these motors, what kind of motor do you want to put on here? Well, you want to find something that weighs somewhere between 20 and 25 grams. These Emax motors, they're coming in at 33 grams. And you think, oh, that's not very big of a difference. Well, you got to multiply it by 4, and so you're actually talking another 40 grams between the 4 arms. 10 on each one makes 40 combined. So you got an extra 40 grams of weight hanging out on the end of your arms. And that's okay, but when you go to crash, this thing is going to have so much mass on it that it's going to put a lot more strain on these arms than something that weighs, 25 grams or 23 grams. It'd be 10 grams lighter. So the bigger deal is that when you crash, the arms won't have as much of a chance to break, and hopefully you'll be able to recover and get up out of the grass and continue the flight. Now, going on to this, there's only spacers inside here for 30 by 30 ESC, 4-in-1 ESCs, and 30 by 30 flight boards. I would have really liked to have seen some 20 by 20 holes that come inside this main plate to hold a smaller flight board, but the problem I think that you would run into is that these arms are actually designed to go into the middle and touch together. That way they provide a little bit of rigidity off of each other instead of being held in place by just 2 screws. They go into the middle, and that helps them, get rid of some of the shaking that they could have inside the by just having the screws in place and not touching each other in the middle. The other advantage is that if one motor is kind of vibrating, it kind of comes in, and it can also share that vibration with the other arms, so help reduce the overall vibration that hopefully gets into your flight board. The one thing I'd like to change about this is it has 2 screws. One goes through the arm up into the spacer, which is just fine. The other one goes through the arm up into the piece that's going to be holding the flight board. So the disadvantage is you're going to have vibrations that come from the motor directly into the flight board. Now, a lot of people make that into a real big deal. I don't think it's such a big deal, especially if you've been flying a unibody, because every vibration on here is fed directly into the flight board. So if you've been flying a unibody and you're going to something like this, I don't think that's as big of a concern as people like it to make it out to be. You could also put in some 3D printed anti-vibration pads in here, and that would help reduce some of the vibrations coming from your motors as well. But like I said, I would really like to have seen some 20 by 20 in there, because I don't think there's actually a good frame out yet that I've seen that only supports 20 by 20 flight boards. If you did, you could have shrink this thing down a little bit more, shrink this down a little bit more, put a micro run cam in here, and this thing would be uber light. So here are a couple more motors that I got out just to show what they weigh. This is a 2205, this is a 3000. Most people who bought the X210 kit are probably running 2600 kV. But just for weights, this is about 28 grams. So this motor is actually probably a little bit too heavy for an ultralight. Here's a 2305. This is just a little bit bigger, 23 instead of 22. It comes in about 29 or 30 grams. And so it's a little bit heavier too. So neither of these motors nor this one are actually going to be your ideal motor for an ultralight frame. You're going to want something more about the 2204 size, and it needs to weigh less, preferably less than 25 grams, and give you at least 900 grams of thrust. If you have less than 900, I think Racer Star makes the 2204, but only output like 700 grams on a 3S, and so it wasn't very good. And And the 4S results on mini quad test bench weren't very good for it either. So I don't recommend the 2204 Racer Star just because it's kind of weak. Hopefully they'll make a better one that has more thrust and a higher KV, and it'll hopefully be better. But for these, none of these are really good. So like I said, you want to find one that's 25 grams or less and outputs at least 900 grams of thrust. Any less thrust than that, it's just going to feel not very fun. Is the BFight210 a competitor in the world of ultralights? Heavens yes, I think this one will do just fine. If you like the True X frame, then this is a good one for you. The only disadvantage I would really say this has, that's really the frame's fault, is this little floppy pieces here. In fact, both of these have the same issue. They're both a little loose here. The problem is all that's going to relate directly into your camera and help you see vibrations worse in your video feed. Now some other disadvantages of this frame is that these arms aren't readily available yet. Now that's not really a disadvantage of the frame, more of the manufacturer not putting them out, but they are super strong. So the only way to get an extra set of arms is to buy another frame. Another issue, or I don't know if it's really a downfall because none of the other competitors really have it either, that this doesn't support 20x20 flight boards or 20x20 4-in-1 ESCs. And the reason for that's probably because there aren't very many good ones out yet. I've only seen 12 and 15 amp ESC, 4-in-1 ESCs that actually support 20x20 holes inside the middle. But so I don't know, it's probably not really a disadvantage of the frame, it's more of a disadvantage of the industry. And we'll probably see more of those come out as more and more people want these ultralight frames. So another thing I was going to tell you about, my friend Bulldogger has an ultralight frame that he flies, and he says in comparison to something like this is the flight characteristics between the two of them are going to be drastically different. This one comes in a little over 350 grams. This one weighs about less than 250 when it's built, plus the battery on both of them. But this one, when it gets going, it has all that inertia going, so that when you let off the throttle, the thing kind of has to is going to slow down more slowly. So to slow down, you got to turn and pull back like this, so the props help slow you down. On this one, because the frame is so light and the motors that you hopefully are using are so light, to slow down you just let off the throttle, and not having nearly as much mass in the air, the thing's just going to slow down on its own a lot faster than something that weighs a lot more. So to learn to fly one of these is like learning to fly all over again, or maybe something like that. Learning to fly all over again is probably a good example. So anyway, I'm anxious to get one of these built and see how true that really is for the way that I fly, and hopefully it really is a whole different experience. So anyway, if you have any questions about this BFight210, leave them down in the description and down in the comments, and I will try to help you out as best I can. And as always, thanks for watching.